Hello, everyone. My name is Raed Faraj, and I am with the Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity. Thank you so much for coming to our event today. Before I start, a couple of things mention about our Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity. We work on coordinating the university's compliance and federal and state laws and university policies and procedures regarding discrimination, retaliation, and sexual harassment, and to promote and integrate the principles of equal opportunity, affirmative action, non-discrimination, and excellence through diversity. Today's event is part of the Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity's Campus Conversation Series, which aims to provide the campus community with opportunities to engage in dialogues about contemporary topics related to equal opportunity and diversity. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for today's event, including the Cross-Cultural Center, UCI Advance, National Society of Black Engineers, Korean American Scientists and Engineers Association, Mexican American Engineers and Scientists. The title of our event today is The State of Faculty and Student Diversity at Engineering Schools. And we're very pleased to have with us today Dean Washington, Gregory Washington, who is the Dean of the Henry Samueli School of Engineering at UC Irvine, to address this topic. Professor Washington has been involved in multi-domain research for the last 20 years and is internationally known for his research on ultra-lightweight, structurally active antenna systems and other structures that involve the use of smart materials. Professor Washington has served on several advisory boards, including the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board and the National Science Foundation Engineering Advisory Board. In the fall of 2012, Professor Washington presented on the double bind in engineering and computer science fields at UCI Advanced Paid Roundtable, reviewing research and data on the ways in which race and gender play into recruitment and retention of engineering and computer science faculty and students. With that, please help me welcome Dean Washington.
Thank you. I'm gonna push this through fairly quickly, especially since we have somewhat of a home crowd, and I have a very contrarian view about diversity, and most of the talk is gonna explain why that is the case. You see, to me, diversity is important, but it's not about helping minorities. Okay, well, that's a good thing to do. That's not what diversity is really about. It's not about doing what's right. Doing what's right is a good thing to do. We should do what's right. But that's not really what diversity is about, in my opinion. You know, some people say, well, it's about payback for mistreatment and white male privilege. Understood. But that's not really what diversity is all about. You see, what diversity is about what the demographics of the country look like and will look like in the future. It's about birth rates and aging, and it's about our future standard of living. You see, as long as diversity is about one group saving another, it will always be lesser than. No, diversity is about how do we save the country. Diversity is about how do we save the country. How do we position the country properly to be successful in future years? And so that's what I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking about. And why do I say, how do we save the country? Well, because we got major grand challenges that we're facing globally. And the grand challenges, I really break them down for us into three different categories. One, those challenges that relate directly to population issues. We got 7 billion people in the planet today. If you go back just to about 1997, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 billion. And so to go from 5 billion to 7 billion in this period of time, we know over the next 10 years we're going to add 1 billion more. If I gave every one of those 1 billion people a light bulb, 140-watt light bulb, and told them they can only burn it for 4 hours a day, we would need the equivalent of a 500 megawatt power plant built every month for a period of 2 years just to meet that demand. Those 1 billion people are not only going to be here, but they're going to eat more. Overall food consumption over the next 10 years globally is going to increase by 40%. Meat consumption will increase 60%. Grain consumption will increase 40%. We're all in a global market economy. That means that all of the countries of the world, with the exception of maybe 2, there's North Korea, although they sell weapons on the open market, and Afghanistan, although recently Afghanistan has now started selling saffron. They've gotten into the saffron market, and there's some debate whether they're out of the poppy market, but, but we won't talk about that one. But all of the nations of the world now compete in the sale of goods and services. And there was something that dramatically happened in the year 2000. And I'll show you the output of that here in a second. But in the year 2000, more than 1.6 billion people became capitalists. And they entered into the marketplace, and that change had a dramatic effect on America. We don't often talk about it now, but it did. When Chinese and Indians entered the marketplace and became real capitalists, that started the trend of some dramatic changes in our standard of living, and you'll see it here in a second. And then finally, telecommunications and aviation have gone through a significant revolution. Right now, we're fighting a war in Afghanistan. A good bit of that war is fought, and if you're listening to the debates nowadays, we talk about the use of drones, right? Well, what people don't know is that oftentimes those drones are flown from right outside, well, right in Nellis Air Force Base, right outside the Strip in Las Vegas. McDonald's has test marketed actually drive-through windows, where you go through the drive-through and the person taking your order is not only not in the same state, but in India. Okay? And so that's the kind of thing that telecommunications has dramatically eliminated distance. What I like to say is that distance is dead. It's gone away. It no longer exist. We're also going through rapid change in terms of how we live and what we do. More than half of the top 10 in-demand jobs in 2011 didn't exist in 2004. They just wasn't here. So I got a largely adult crowd in here, so I'll ask this question. How many of you in here have Facebook? Have Facebook accounts? Okay. It's all right. It's more than half the room. When I do that with students around, I tell them they got to get off Facebook because their parents and the adults are getting on, so you got to get off. And so, but Facebook didn't exist before 2004. How many of you have a smartphone? The Apple iPhone was invented in 2007. Did not exist before 2004. Wi-Fi was a misspelled word. 3G was a parking spot. These things did not exist. And now we can't live without them. Let me take your phone away. What's your favorite app? You see, GM went from being the #1 automotive retailer to bankruptcy and then back to #1 in just a period of 3 years. As technologists, we like to look at the years to 50 million users. And so if I look at radio, it's 38, television 13, internet 4, iPod 3, Facebook 2 years. If Facebook were a country today with its over 900 million users, it'd be the second largest country on the planet. And if China would let its citizens be Facebook members, it'd be the largest by far. You see, it's about the tech. This is what it's all about. It's about the technology. It's about change. So we live in Irvine, right? How many of you live in Irvine? Everybody here? Most of you here? I don't know if you're here. None of you live in Irvine? You just work here. Okay. So, okay. Well, you do know that Irvine is a planned community, right? Yes? We know that Irvine's a planned community. And, you know, we actually did this test. I'll tell you, it's kind of funny. Everything is in a place for a reason. Okay? If you're riding down the street and there's a, you know, a large boulder on the side of the road, or, you know, in the grass, it's actually there on purpose. It didn't just get there by accident. So we put a boulder there. Just put a rock there. Let's see what happens. How long will it stay? It's about 2 weeks. So everything in its plan. And so why do I bring that up? Because globally, in some countries, everything is planned. You have to know that we are not going through this life in a competitive framework with others who are competing by accident. It is purposeful and deliberate. This is the chart of of science and engineering degrees, first degrees by year and by country. So you see the US here, you see Japan here. This is China. Okay? Look right here. Now, when I'm talking to engineering students, they get this very quickly. Because if they turn in a lab report with this in it, there's something wrong with their data, right? We know that they've been manipulating the data if your plot looks like this. This is not by accident. Right? You have some growth rate, and then all of a sudden, you take off. No, that's by design. 7 of 9 Chinese leaders have engineering or science as a first degree. Of their top leadership, 7 of their 9 top leadership have engineering or science as a first degree. Okay, of the 535 members of the House of Representatives and the Senate, 7 of them have science or engineering as a first degree. In fact, more of them have no degree. More of them have no degree, no college education whatsoever, than those that have a degree in STEM. Okay, do you see the situation the country's in? You understand now why they said global warming doesn't exist. We see the data, we see the change, but it doesn't exist. Why? My pastor told me so. My pastor said it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Can't look at data. Can't, okay, well, maybe it exists, but man has nothing to do with it. That's why we're dealing with these arguments and issues in the country. Why is that important? Because there's a competitive framework out here, and we need to be part of that competitive piece. To me, this is all about diversity. I'll get to exactly how in a second. This is what Singapore looked like in the 1960s. This is what Singapore looks like now. This picture was taken from the same vantage point. I'll ask you a question. Do we have a single U.S. city that looks like that? We have nothing that modern. You see, at the end of the day, diversity is also about jobs. This is the total number in millions of jobs that were created by decade, going all the way back to 1940. So the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, millions of jobs. And then right here, in the decade of the 2000s, we actually had a loss. We're calling it now the lost decade. So what do some people, that's President Bush, there he is, right? Here he is, see, we told you, get out of the bushes. President Bush. It's not President Bush. He might have a little bit to do with it, but not much. It's not President Bush at all. It's the fact that starting here, we got real competition globally. Real competition. Countries that entered into the global mix that had the wherewithal, the tools, and the means to actually compete. And now with distance being dead, companies can source anywhere. They can source anywhere for talent. And many of them are choosing to source their talent all over the globe. Why is this a diversity issue? There's 7 billion people, as I told you. 5 billion of them are adults. 3 billion of them are currently looking for work or have work. There are only 1.2 billion formal jobs globally. So there are 1.8 billion people looking for a formal job. According to Gallup, job attainment is the most important global issue and is at the core of much of the conflict in countries nationally. 57% of black men in Detroit have no job. 56% in Buffalo. 55% in Milwaukee. 54% in Cleveland. 52% in Chicago. Why is the murder rate in Chicago so high? So, it is the home of the president, for crying out loud. No, these are diversity issues. These issues relate directly to diversity. Here's a question. How long are these people going to be without jobs and let you keep yours? This question has to be one that people have to deal with where they sit. You have to think about it in terms of how does this affect me as an individual? Because that's how we're going to go forward and actually solve the problem. There are also huge opportunities globally. These opportunities are coming, and they're coming at a tremendous pace. We know that the human genome was sequenced. In 2013, computers will eclipse humans in computational capacity. Communications bandwidth has increased 100,000 times since 2000. So right now, I'm planning a conference. The conference planning group has a person from Israel, a person from Rome, and then people here in the US. And we all meet once a week on Skype to telecon how we're going to plan this conference. And we all talk to each other just like I'm talking to people in this room. Most of this is due to one company who shares this campus with us, Broadcom. That's how close this is to home. You see, all of these opportunities tell us that right now the global GDP, gross domestic product, the total goods and services that the whole globe produces is somewhere in the neighborhood of about $60 trillion, right? Of that, 15 trillion of it is the US right now, which is 25%. That's far more than any other country. But our growth rate in GDP is only about 2%. Number 2 on that list is China. They're at about 6 trillion, but their growth rate is 10%. Even with the Great Recession and all the job losses in the 2000s, if you look globally, the job growth rate has been somewhere about 4%. If we project that out in 30 years, GDP will be 200 trillion. China will have a GDP of 70 trillion. And the US will have a GDP of 30 trillion. So when you start talking about this, what's going to happen in the future, you have to have the horses to produce the product, to produce the innovations, to produce the wherewithal to compete in the society of the future. We're going to go from 60 trillion in GDP as a planet to 200 in GDP over the next 30 years. Who's going to produce the economic output? That is what this is all about. Do we have enough people who are positioned in the right places to do it? That is what this is all about. That's what's going to decide what happens in the future. And I contend to you that right now, this is where we're struggling. Let's get to the heart of the problem. Because that is the issue. That's how the demographics piece relate to STEM. If I look in this country, so the question, who has the horses to win that race? I showed you what's happening in China. So, if I go between 2000 and 2009, where are the people coming from in this country? The US net population change, where are they coming from? If I look at the numbers here, right? or they're not coming from the largest ethnic groups. It's not Caucasian. All of the growth is coming from so-called underrepresented minorities. But outside of Asian populations, underrepresented minorities are woefully underrepresented in STEM. If you don't have, if your growth is not in the area where you need to compete, you're just not going to have the people. You just won't have enough people to compete as the global economies continue to grow. Do you see what I'm saying? So this is not about helping any one particular group. It's all about helping the country. We have to have all hands up. We can't ignore half of our population as women. Can't ignore them. We have to figure out how to make it work, right? Because that half, you can't compete. China doesn't ignore their women. Oh, but I have data to show that. You see, as you go forward, 85% of the growth in the U.S. country and U.S. to this date has been attributed to directly from science, engineering, and technology. Scientists and engineers only compose 4% of the workforce. Okay? Women and underrepresented minorities are underrepresented in these areas. And at the end of the day, these problems will not be solved by government. Let me show you something here. It's a lot of dots on this page. Don't worry about what individual dots mean. But these are the difference between men. So this is so all of the countries on this side, this is the latest national mathematics test. All of the countries on this side, boys did better than girls, right? So by whatever percentage they did better, the country winds up here. So it goes in 2%, 4%, such and such, such. And all the countries on this side, girls did better than boys, right? Math is a great precursor to tell you what the future actually looks like. What I've done here is put some labels on some of the countries. You all can't see them very well, but let me show you some. I could point on this side. There's China, Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, Thailand. Even in some of the countries over here, the country with the highest differential in favor of women is Jordan. Most of your Middle Eastern countries are on this side of the map. Oh, well then who do you think's on this side of the map? US, England, France. Western countries. There is something happening. You cannot ignore half of your population and be successful in the future. And if they're not getting it in math in the 9th grade, they're going to have a hard time being scientists and engineers in the future. You see what I'm saying? Let's talk about the data in this country. Let's bring it closer to home, and then let's wrap this up, and I'll open it up for questions. So if I look at bachelor's degrees in engineering in 2011, by ethnicity, these were the bachelor's degrees nationally, okay? This is how many, so 66% of them were Caucasian. You had Asian American, about 12.2%, Hispanic 8.5%, African American 4.2%, you have some unknown and other there as well, okay? And interestingly enough, those trends have held fairly constant over a 15-year period. If I look at the trends at UCI, we start to see a different picture. If you look at 2011, so this largest ethnic group right here is actually Hispanic. This is our Asian, Chinese population. This here, 15.1% is Caucasian. That's UCI's numbers in 2011. In 2012, if I look at the same demographics here at UCI, we see that actually the numbers of Asian and Hispanic populations are actually growing. Caucasians actually shrinking. Okay, I'll keep going. If I look at transfer students, now on the transfer student ranks, largest group is Caucasian of transfer students coming in, and you see group C, that's in 2011. This here is in 2012. So the numbers are fairly constant, but again, you see large numbers of Hispanic and Chinese even in this framework. Most of our students now, the largest number of students that come in are actually come in not through transfer, but actually come in directly. If I look at bachelor's degrees by gender, male is somewhere around, this is the national number up top. Male is about, a little close to 82%. Female about 18. The UCI number here, Well, the UCI number here, we're a little over 20%. We're in the 20s. I don't know why it's not showing it, but we're in the 20% in UCI, which is ahead of the national average. If you look at incoming freshmen, what we look like in terms of a female and male between both 2011 and 2012. If we look at master's degrees by gender, again, you see the national numbers there and you see where UCI is. We're ahead in both master's and doctoral degrees by gender. If we look at master's degrees by ethnicity, and you look at those numbers here, and then you look at the numbers of underrepresented minorities at UCI relative to the national average, we're growing but behind. Okay? We can do the same thing for doctoral degrees. You see the numbers there. Again, the key takeaways here, and I'm not trying to flash a whole lot of numbers. There are certain trends that I look for. Number one, over a 10, 15-year period, these numbers are fairly constant. There are no major changes when you start talking about masters. Even though the undergraduate numbers have changed dramatically, masters, PhD numbers are consistently the same. And so that means that we have some work to do in those spaces. We see in 2011, your international students are about 52%, US students make up about 48%, and underrepresented minorities actually dropped. In 2012, we're up somewhat, right? On the URMs, but we say we're up by a factor of 4, and that's great, but the numbers are so small, it doesn't take much to go. When you take in one person and you take in 4 the next year, you're up by a factor of 4, right? So it doesn't take that much to get there. And so what does that mean? What do we have to do here? How do I take everything that we've put together and we sum it up, and how do we make sense of all of it? Well, you make sense of it by this. Look, somebody, some institution, somewhere has to be an example for others to look at and say, this place is doing it the right way. We have here at UCI, we have some demographic advantages in our favor that we have to parlay to higher degree fields, right? We are already engineering in particular, which you would not expect, would classify in many places as an Hispanic serving institution. If you look at the demographic numbers that I gave you at the bachelor's level, we would qualify. Okay? If you're looking at engineering, I don't know what the rest of the campus's demographics look like, but here in engineering, you can make that case. You can't make that case at the bachelor's and at the master's and the PhD levels. But there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to. Those students are here, they're doing fairly well. Why can't we move it forward? We have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 300 students, women, underrepresented minorities, that have greater than a 3.5 GPA. We can do something with that. The way we do it is we have to have a greater focus on our grad programs. And that's the first piece. And so we've initiated a number of programs here to have a greater focus. We started this year. And so we're going to do it by number one, recruiting. I'll show you our new display here in a second. And so we're sending students to many of the national conferences to bring other students here. It's, especially NSBE, SHIP, Maya's, all of those conferences we want to bring. We want to engage students and bring them here for graduate school. We have great programs here that we want to continue to promote and go. We have the camp program. I see we have our camp director here, and the camp program is a great program. We have Code here as well, another great program. The idea is, how do we leverage those programs to produce significantly more in terms of graduate students? That's going to be a big part of our focus. The other part of it is just plain money. We're going to put resources we're going to provide resources for those departments. We're going to use our block funds and funds that we have to redirect resources to those departments that want to go out and have an actively diverse graduate student workforce. If the undergraduate student population is as diverse as it is, there's no reason why the graduate population can't be as diverse also. This is what our display looks like. I think it's been to what? One conference now? Is that, Carla, or two? One? We've also now elevated diversity from its current stature in the school to that on our leadership council. So this is our executive board and our leadership councils for both engineering and ICS now. We've merged them together. And so we've established now a diversity committee that would engage industry and have direct connections to both of them. So my last slide here says this. We are already, there is a global problem in this space. And if we don't fix it and fix it soon, we're not going to have, we're just not going to have enough people to be able to compete globally. It's not going to be how talented the people are or how talented they're not. It's just not going to be enough of them. Companies are actually realizing this now. The biggest push and emphasis on the federal government is to increase the number of H-1B visas, right? And what you hear them saying is now, if a student graduates with a STEM degree and they come here from a foreign country, that there should be a green card literally attached to that degree when they graduate. And I understand all of that. The driver for that is what I've just shown you. This is not rocket science. We just don't have the numbers. Right now in this country, 10,000 people per day are turning 65. And it's going to continue for the next 17 years. Our population is aging, and is aging at an astronomical rate. 10,000 people a day. We had Boeing here just earlier this week. They repeated exactly what I'm telling you right now. Half of Boeing's workforce, well, like I said, 30% of Boeing's workforce right now is at retirement age. 30%. And they claim that in the next 5 years, it will be 55% will be at retirement age at Boeing right now. You can replicate it with Caterpillar. You can replicate it with most, well, Google, probably not. Okay. Facebook, probably not. But in terms of our, General Electric and Caterpillar and John Deere and the good old wholesome American companies, which make up the bulk of the Fortune 500, recognize that there is a serious issue. Okay? And that serious issue is demographic and age driven. We can't fix that problem unless we have all hands on deck. I think UCI can be a great example because of where we're already positioned, right? So through the great work of many of the people in this room, we're already positioned very well to lead a national discourse on this topic. We have to do some things at the graduate level to readjust ourselves, but if we do that, we can be a very, very impactful. We're not a small engineering program anymore, especially when you add in ICS. Engineering and ICS have more than 4,200 undergraduates in engineering. That's larger than all but 2 UCs. Okay? We'd be in the top 4 producers in the state of California of engineers, just because of how we're positioned. So we're not small. We're a good medium-large size engineering program. And with that, we have something to say about what happens in the future. So on that note, I'll stop and I'll take any questions. Thank you. Yes.
Aside from the finances that would be required to reinvest in this, what other barriers do you see to increasing diversity within?
Oh, the biggest barrier is not financial. The biggest barrier is culture. Our culture here is that we basically, we don't recruit. Some of our units have a recruitment day, but but that's to get a few high-end students on a top end. In general, we don't have any recruitment at all at the undergraduate level, per se. Okay, the students apply, and when we see a really a strong cohort of high ability students, we'll go after and recruit them. But in general, we don't recruit broad base. That process needs to be adjusted so that we can tailor our student body to have the kind of profile that we think is best suited for the country. Our faculty in general at the graduate level, they just bring the applicants. Let's let all the apps come in, and then the apps come in, we choose the best students. A couple of them do have recruitment days that are successful. Again, they're targeting a very high quality level of student, but the broad mass of students are students who just apply and we accept. Okay, and like I said, we look at a couple of scores. It's driven by the metrics. We look at the numbers. Those students with the best metrics are those ones that are accepted. Those kinds of things have to be adjusted to say, what are we actually looking to do? What kind of impact do we want to have long term? And our admission criteria need to be in alignment with those kinds of outcomes. Okay, and so that to me is the real biggest issue.
I see student research as the currency for students to go on to graduate school. However, just like we are competing for the students to stay here and conduct research, they also have options throughout the country as well as throughout the world. My question to you, I think we already have a mass of students. Some of the challenges have to do with finding, even if it were a $300 stipend, to be able to fund their research with faculty here on campus to go ahead and strengthen that mass. I see that as a big issue for a lot of our students because many times at that I work during the summer or I have the opportunity to maybe gain some credit, course credit here by conducting research. So there's the challenge for a lot of our URM students as well.
So at the graduate level, we have block. At the undergraduate level, there really is no resource. So we can redirect funds at the graduate level towards block to handle some of that. At the undergraduate level, we have to come up with larger sources. Those sources are probably going to have to come from the donor community because in terms of core university resources, those resources are very limited. Although we're getting some flexibility, there's probably more that we can do than what we've been able to do in the past 2 or 3 years. So this is a conversation that we need to have.
Do you think we have to tailor our programs to make them more attractive, say, to female or URM students? And then my example would be, for example, biomedical engineering seems to be more attractive to women students than, say, mechanical, because there may be to revise the mechanical program and make it more attractive.
Well, this is the cultural, yes, it should be. This is the cultural issue that someone asked about later. We do have to, it's not just changing the curriculum. There's a whole document that's focused in STEM that was put out by the National Academies called Changing the Conversation. And in that document, what we find is that if you just change your marketing and advertising materials, if you just tweak them in ways that make them all more inclusive, you will naturally get an increase of students wanting to engage in your programs. And so, I've looked at a number of our publications from our different departments, and some of them you don't see a single woman anywhere on the publication. And so if a woman's looking at that, they're gonna say, well, why would I want to go? There are no women here. And even though there may be, the thought is that there are none here, okay? We don't promote that this is a better place for women and underrepresented minorities and others. By the numbers, the data shows that we're above average, significantly above average. But these are the kinds of things we have to promote. Surush?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the first statistics you gave, and I think the most alarming part of it is that things haven't changed over the years.
Right.
Okay, it's every university you go to, they have the same challenge, right?
Now they have changed here at the undergraduate level. Because I think if you go back 10 years,
Right.
undergraduate level, you don't have the demographics we have.
All right, so, but hopefully, some of those undergraduates, when they graduate, should be interested.
Right.
in going
That's not
to
happening.
see them.
Agreed.
You go to NSF, NASA, most of us as faculty end up going on these panels, and everybody's talking about the same thing. Frustrations are all over. Projects are under pressure, diversity. There's a lot of talk about it. Doesn't happen. You pointed out one thing very interesting. You said, well, it's really a culture, right? I thought you used the word culture. And you said, well, we probably have to do a better job of recruiting. But recruitment doesn't work one way, okay? You really have to have a pool of interested and talented students that are willing to go to these programs. Now, we have a lot of contradictions. We can get into a debate on this. At one point you say, well, the opportunities have to be created for students to want to go, and then we as people on this admission committees have to look at these things. At the same time, university administrators are under the pressure to make sure that the next round of U.S. News and World Report or Academy evaluations come. They show, my God, we are growing, we've got all these wonderful folks. So there are really a lot of things that somehow don't go together. And I don't know how many universities we can find that have really broken out of this difficulty to show really statistics improving. You brought up international, that graph you showed part of the world, that were at least in terms of female students, of course I go back to Iran quite often, and I'm really impressed to see, even though an Islamic country with all the stereotyping and everything that you hear these days. You pointed out Jordan. I'll be there next week. I'll have some statistics once I see it. But in Iran, most engineering schools in the top schools are more than 50% are female.
That's right.
Okay, even Sharif University, the top one, is perhaps 60–65%, and that's why we see a lot of the applicants are female. So I think, I don't know, every time we go to these meetings at NSR, we bring up that we have to really examine to see what is it that the rest of the world, you pointed out China. excitement among students to go for these higher degrees is higher than we find it with domestic students. So maybe it's better opportunities out there at the beginning, but then at the end, they may not fall into the category.
So, no, this is a very interesting, so let me bring up a couple of things, because you said some things that are really important. The first one is that I actually think we can do more here. You mentioned that we got these undergraduates, why aren't they applying for school? That's an area where I think we need to spend some effort to increase, because you're absolutely right, we should be growing that area. You know, I actually think that we can be successful in that space. And if we're not successful, what is that saying about our undergraduate program and what we're doing to the students, right? So, so I do think that is an area, what I would call low-hanging fruit. But we're not going after that, but we need to. Now, the other thing you said that I think is really important is there isn't, I don't think that there is as much of a mismatch as one would think, because we can grow our populations and grow our numbers of diverse students simultaneously, right? But we have very little effort in that space. Very few of our faculty go to these conferences where, there are students out there. We're just not going after them to get them. Just like we have a large cohort of students here that if we're not getting the ones here, I mean, we're over 30% Hispanic. If we're not getting the Latino students, Hispanic students here, we're definitely not going to go get the ones at UCLA and at Arizona State and places like we're not getting them because they're right here. They don't have to leave the campus. And so I think this is a recruitment issue.
But it's a little bit more challenging. Let me give you a hydrometeorological example.
Okay.
If assuming cloud seeding worked, if I have clouds over this area and I see the cloud, doesn't mean that it's going to rain here. It probably will rain over UCLA. That means it cannot be done just by us. We may push and encourage students to go to grad school, but then if they have opportunities and they decide that, well, USC is better or UCLA is better, they're going to go. We have to have. But we still benefit.
I agree, but we still benefit. Here's why.
Of course, I have no doubt.
If we take our undergraduates, coach them up, and let's say they go do their grad school at UCLA, that's actually a good thing.
It is.
Because when those students graduate with their PhDs, now I'm going to UCLA and say, look, why don't you apply to be a faculty member back here at your, so as long as we get them in the system, I think we can benefit.
And also the other part of the systems have to also think the same way, which I assume every place is.
Everybody wants to do it, but they lack good examples. That's what I believe.
Thank you for your effort.
What if we were to, when the students are juniors, the beginning of their junior year, on a quarterly basis, there be a graduate class it could be a workshop. Could be a workshop, you offer pizza, you offer whatever you want. You would have faculty who are here to be part of a panel talking to them about what it means to be a faculty. And then you have the students, they're already here.
Understood.
I can give you the numbers of all the students who are in engineering, who are minorities, who are graduating.
Understood. No, look, you're right. These kind of things, and we got to put the right faculty in front of them, right? Some of our faculty we put in front of them, they say, I don't know about being an engineer, but I don't want to be what that person is. And so we have to make sure, but you're right, these are things that are easy to do.
But even if you were the wrong faculty, because of the fact that the students need to know that it's not all roses when you go to graduate school. You're going to be having to make
Understood.
your own way. Not everybody's going to be a mentor, but somebody will be able to, sometimes even, I learn more from those who were not my mentors than I did from those who were.
Understood. Yes.
The first statement about demography shows significant divergence from other, is that other universities, they have more diversity than we do?
No, at the undergraduate level, they are far less.
Okay.
Actually, when I show our undergraduate BS demographics to people at companies, they're actually blown away because they can't believe that our numbers of URMs are actually so high. That is not common at all. And that's something that we have here that we can build on. And it's not just the number of students, it's the quality of students in that cohort as well are actually quite good. Okay, and so we're just not taking advantage of them from the perspective of actually using it. Yes.
You've been talking a lot about the student demographics, and I understand that gives your pipeline to your faculty.
And that's why I focus there.
And so, what are the efforts we can take now related to the faculty?
So
Recruitment and retention.
agreed. I look at this as a long-term problem. So to me, the solution of a long-term problem starts by creating more PhDs. We create more PhDs by creating more graduate students that have an affinity towards us. We have this huge population of students. We got to get them interested in grad school and into the pipeline and out into graduate programs, and then bring those students back in as faculty. Okay, that's the philosophical framework that I have that I think can work. In terms of the numbers of people who are here, we just don't have that many. I'm the only African American faculty member in engineering. I just happen to be the dean, right? From a perspective of Hispanic faculty, we have, what is that, John, 10? Somewhere around there? 10 or 11? Well, depending on how you count. Yeah, right. Depending if you count foreign born or not. So, when you look at the number of, now if you look at the number of female faculty, if you look at our trends, we actually look quite good. And since I've been here, the majority of our hires have actually been female. And so that's a trend we hope can actually continue as we move forward. The areas that we know of that will be growing in hiring going forward tend to be areas where there is a higher concentration of interest among female graduates. So I see no reason why our populations can't grow and be more diverse just naturally just because the population pools favor us. That being said, we're going to have to do some additional work in that space to help. Yes.
I like to share my observation with regard to the preparation or the qualification of the incoming undergraduate.
Okay.
My observation from the country like Taiwan, China and Japan are that they have higher requirement on science subject, mathematics, science. So in comparison to the requirement for the high school student in this country, I feel that it's not enough preparation or requirement in science and mathematics. And that, I think, is one of the, bottleneck. We are not getting the really high quality students prepared enough number. So that is something that has to do with the high school.
So here's something that's very interesting. So I consult with a couple of local companies here that are K-12 based and focused. The largest interest, external interest in what's happening in U.S. high schools, especially the ones here. So I think that you may have a bigger case nationally than you do here. The schools here are actually quite good, and in my opinion, actually a little too rigorous, to be honest with you. But they're very, very good. And we had public school officials from China here recently, and their feedback was, we want our students in a curriculum like this as opposed to what they have in China. The big issue is, look, the last 2 years in China, they're basically studying for the test. And everything is focused on that exam, because that exam basically determines what happens with them going forward. And so when you look at that kind of environment, and they look at the creativity and some of the kinds of things that we have here, there's a big push to make their educational systems look more like ours. So we need to be thinking of, it's really about what the future looks like, not what the past has looked like. Okay? And so we're not just going to have lots of people, but we're going to have people with a certain set of skills that go beyond just the mathematics and science. They're going to have to be able to connect. There's a recent study called Engineering 2020, and it looks at about 16 or 17 different dimensions that you're going to have in the future in order to be successful in the engineering space. And strong analytical skills are just one criteria. There are like 17 more. And so from that perspective, I think we have, I think we're in okay shape. What's happening is that we have many school districts nationally who aren't near the standard of the school districts here locally. I mean, you take one of the best kids out of a university high, you can drop them anywhere in the world. They're going to be pretty good. They're going to do well. We can't say that for the best kid coming out of a school in the inner city in Chicago. It could be the best student. They could have gotten straight A's coming out of that school, and they may not have enough of the right kinds of things to be competitive in an environment with really good students from other parts of the country. And so trying to get that playing field level is the big issue that we have to figure out and what to do here. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I saw that you have been focusing on the recruiting students in science and engineering. That's
Yes.
one of your focus. And I was saying that preparation of the students are really...
Well, preparation is an issue, but I don't know that it is.
Graduate from
Right.
junior high, yes, I know. Most of them are good.
Top
But
notch.
there are a lot of incoming undergraduate from less.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Some
And
agree with you.
based on what I have been teaching, I have the undergraduate. I feel that they are not.
You don't think the undergraduates are as good?
They underprepared in science and mathematics.
Okay, well, this is something we should continue to have a discussion on. I know I'm kind of short for time,
I
so.
think we've, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Washington, for this extremely important. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it, you found it informative. I personally did. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Before you leave, this is a small token of appreciation on behalf of the Office of Equal Opportunity and Diversity.
Thank you very much.
We wish you the best in your efforts and your leadership, and continue to serve our campus community at large. Thank you
All right,
so much.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I have him come in.